So my participation in cannabis legislation started in 2010 with a commission to study the prohibition of marijuana in Rhode Island. Then in 2012, we successfully passed decriminalization in Rhode Island. In 2014, I introduced the first bill to establish a recreational structure modeled after Colorado. Between then and now, several well-functioning recreational structures have been implemented in several states, including New York, Illinois, and Massachusetts. Observing and incorporating what works best in other states has helped to guide us to what we have before you today. This is the first consensus bill between the House and the Senate since this effort began several years ago. And this happened with the help of attorneys from both the House and the Senate, and input from many, including many of you, and our Majority Leader, Senator McCaffrey. Since introduction earlier this month, input from stakeholders continues. And I want to give you an idea of the amount of people who are not only interested, but the amount of people who have either contacted me or attorneys or met with others with very positive feedback as recently as a few hours ago. BHDH, the League of Cities and Towns, DBR, Department of Revenue, Black Lives Matter, Marijuana Policy Project, who helped me draft legislation earlier on, Reclaim RI, cultivators, manufacturers, as early as this morning, talked to me about some issues or wrote in about some issues, prevention and providers. None of what I have heard or we have heard derails this effort. And many of the people who contacted me were concerned that their issues wouldn't be taken seriously going forward because there was already a bill before us. And I have consistently made it clear to them that their input is not only important, but critical to the process of getting this right. So we are in position to vote on it. The hearing process is an important component of developing a final version of this bill. And that has already begun, as I explained, and will continue throughout the hearing process. I feel strongly that this will result in a better bill, and to this day, none of what we have heard derails any component of the bill before you. And now I'd like to go to the slideshow to go over the several components of the legislation that people will be commenting on, and that is shorter than going through 116 pages.
Thank you. Very good. You may proceed.
So first we have, and you can stop me at any point, or I can just pass over it if there are any questions. Make sure to get my attention. Personal use is covered. 21 years and older can buy, possess, and use 1 ounce or less. Home grow is permitted in this bill currently at 3 mature plants and 3 immature plants. And you must be 21 years or older, again, to possess cannabis. Most often discussed amongst those who were revising over previous year's version is the regulatory structure. The Cannabis Control Commission has 3 members appointed by the governor with advice and consent of the speaker and the president. And then there is a cannabis advisory board that has several members representing several advocacies and important participants. And then the Cannabis Office, which is familiar to all those who are involved in the current program as it currently administers the current program. To the next slide. Goes through the membership of the advisory board, If you have any questions on that membership, you can see that many stakeholders and those who will be involved in administering are well represented. And next you have the further explanation of the advisory board and the responsibilities of the commissioner also. And the cannabis office, which I went over very briefly, is the administrators that are currently, administrators and enforcers that are currently in DBR. And then the revenue structure, which is, we deliberately used the models that is used in, there are currently 18 states that have a structure. And this is directly reflects Massachusetts. As many of you know, whenever there's even a minor discrepancy on revenue, Rhode Islanders are likely to seek it. Even if it's 1% on sales tax, they'll go to a retailer in Seekonk to save that 1%. So one of the purposes of having it reflect directly is to avoid that, as there are many active retailers in adjoining communities on the Massachusetts side. And the fees also, all the licensing fees go to the Social Equity Fund, which will enable those from impacted communities to immediately access funds to help them implement their licensing and pay for their licensing fees also. So also there is, the next slide goes through the variety of licenses. So there are several licenses, as people are aware of, and most discuss is a retail license, but there's also cultivation license, which is actually, we have currently about 60 cultivation licenses active for the medical program. And many of those have had enough input to make the case that they could meet capacity, and so therefore there's a moratorium on cultivator licenses recommended in this bill for a 2-year period, and there'll be some more detail on that. The other licenses have to do with testing, which is critical. One of the more important reasons to have a program is to make sure that all product is tested, not only for what it presents itself as far as the components of it and the percentage of THC and CBD and everything else in it, but to make sure there are no pesticides or other mold or other components in it that should not be in it. It's a very important. But going to the next slide, so the hybrid retailers are a structure, those who either have a medical license now or won one in the lottery, that they would be able to convert to a hybrid. So before the licensure in general was administered and presented by the Cannabis Commission, DBR would set up a structure by October 1st to allow for current medical to do both, recreational and medical. So the retailers, in addition to the 9 potential hybrids, we also will use the structure in which the regions that the lottery was structured in to go in to be used for 24 retail licenses to be permitted throughout the state. I want to also bring your attention to the fact that there is a 1-1-2 formula, and each zone must have at least one co-op, one social equity, and 2 general applicants. As I spoke about earlier, cultivators, there'll be a moratorium for 2 years upon the first issuance of a license. Local control, each city and town, there's a structure in the bill to have each city and town the ability to opt out. They must opt out in the November 22 election. City or town council has to approve that to go on the ballot for a general election as part of that election to vote out. Municipalities are barred from creating unreasonable zoning restrictions. This language was built and inspired by what many of you may have observed across the border in Fall River, in that we don't want municipalities to get involved at the level that may result in some of the issues around the way Fall River ended up issuing licenses. Social equity. The goal of this was to reduce barriers to participation in the cannabis industry for people who are adversely impacted by the historical laws we've had in place. The commissioner administers the funds. The funds are supported by application and licensing fees, and will provide grants and fee waivers, including licensing fees, for those qualified applicants, and support them with job training, workforce development, and support a program for restorative justice, prison diversion, drug rehab, and education. The program is also, and it might be in a later slide, but I think now's a good time to talk about it, the nine new medical licenses that were granted, or the 6 new medical licenses that were granted in the lottery. The 9 altogether, there's a fee for that hybrid of $125,000 because it's envisioned that they get a serious head start over those who will be licensed in the future. And that head start will support a licensing fee of $125,000. That fee of $125,000 creates, from day one of this process, $1 million social equity fund to support those initial 6 licenses from each district. So this next slide, these disproportionately impacted areas, it goes through what qualifies you to apply for a social equity license. And so does the next slide. So this final slide on penalties also incorporates, if you look at these penalties that transition once this legislation is passed, it also sets up the structure for what would be available for expungement or a sealed record. And so I know that you will be hearing from those who testify and how important it is to get this structure right. We've made our best attempt, so has the governor. The courts have been involved, the Attorney General's been involved, many of you have been involved, and we see this an ongoing discussion on how expungement or a sealed record will proceed forward. And with that, I can answer any questions you may have before you get to those